Sometimes the most powerful moments begin in silence. No spotlight, no applause, just a quiet girl sitting at the back of a classroom, trying not to be seen. In a world where confidence is often mistaken for loudness, and talent is too easily judged by appearance, one young girl chose to speak not with her voice, but with her hands, and a piano. This is the story of Alicia Harris, a 14-year-old girl who was laughed at, dismissed, and underestimated simply because she was different. But what her classmates and teachers didn't know was that beneath her silence lived a storm of emotion, strength, and brilliance. And when the moment came, she didn't just play a song, she played her truth. What started as a joke turned into a moment that no one in that room would ever forget. This is more than just music. This is the beginning of something greater. Alicia didn't ask to be noticed. She wasn't loud. She didn't seek attention. Most days, she just tried to make it through without giving anyone a reason to stare. She had her seat, second to last row in room 214, next to the rattling radiator and the peeling wall. It was a corner the other kids avoided, but to her it felt like safety, distance. She kept her head down, her backpack zipped, and her voice low. In a school where being different was dangerous, being invisible felt like protection. But even silence has a sound if you listen close enough. And the sound that lived inside Alicia, through late-night practice sessions and bruised fingers, through loneliness and resilience, was waiting. Waiting for a moment. Waiting for a spark. It would come, not in a grand invitation, but in a laugh. A joke. One careless comment from a teacher. One room full of eyes. And just like that, everything began to change. Alicia was tall for her age, lean and straight-backed with skin the color of warm mahogany and hair coiled into a puff she did herself every morning in front of the bathroom mirror. She kept to herself, carried a heavy backpack with sheet music tucked between folders, and never ate lunch in the cafeteria. Most of her classmates didn't know her name. A few called her Mute Girl or Beethoven's cousin. Some thought she was weird for always reading or doodling treble clefs in the margins of her notebooks. No one really saw her. That Tuesday afternoon, sunlight streamed in sideways through the cracked blinds while Coach Nelson stood awkwardly at the front of the room, clipboard in hand. He cleared his throat like he didn't really want to be there. "All right, folks," he said, in his usual half-joking, half-tired tone. "Talent shows Friday next week. We need acts, singers, dancers, magicians, whatever you got. Don't be shy." Ms. Fallon, the music teacher, leaned over to him with a smirk and said a little too loudly, "What about our little pianist in the back?" Her finger pointed directly at Alicia. "She's always got that sheet music with her. Maybe she can give us a little chopsticks." Coach Nelson chuckled. "Yeah, come on, Harris, let's hear it. Been carrying music around all year, might as well show us what it's for." The laughter started slow. One or two snickers, then a wave of chuckles from the row in front. A boy near the window mimicked piano sounds with exaggerated plinking fingers. Another whispered something about playing Mozart in the hood. It wasn't loud, but it was loud enough. Alicia's fingers tightened on the zipper of her hoodie. She didn't look up, not right away. Ms. Fallon smiled like she was being encouraging, but her tone said otherwise. "Just teasing, sweetheart," she added. "Unless you're really up for it." Alicia lifted her eyes, her voice steady but quiet. "I'll play." The room stilled. Coach Nelson raised his eyebrows. "You serious?" She didn't answer again. Just reached forward, took the clipboard from the edge of a desk and wrote in block letters, "Alicia Harris, piano, original. No drama, no sass, just fact." The class murmured. Some smirked. Others exchanged looks like they'd just been handed tickets to a train wreck. Alicia sat back down without another word. That afternoon, the hallway buzzed with whispers. Outside the main office, where the sign-up sheet hung beside the vending machine that never worked, her name was already gathering attention. "Who's Alicia Harris?" one girl asked. "She's the one who never talks," another replied. Plays piano or something. Bet it's Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, a boy said, on one finger. Laughter again. Always laughter. But she walked past them like they weren't there, earbuds in, hands in her pockets. Her mind already somewhere else. Her walk home took her past the corner store with the faded welcome sign, past the community mural that had started chipping years ago but still showed Dr. King with his arm raised, past the old Baptist church with the crooked bell tower. She lived on the third floor of a narrow red brick building where the hallway always smelled like cooked onions and cleaning bleach. Inside, the apartment was quiet, clean, but worn. Her grandmother, Miss Evelyn, sat in her usual spot near the window, knitting slowly while an old gospel cassette played softly in the background. You're home, she said without looking up. You eat anything yet? Not hungry, Alicia replied. She didn't mention the talent show. Instead, she slipped off her shoes, walked over to the piano tucked against the far wall, and lifted the cover. It wasn't a fancy instrument. The black lacquer had long faded to dull gray. Several keys stuck slightly, and the right pedal needed a kick sometimes. But it was her sanctuary, her place, her voice. She laid her fingers on the keys and started to play. The melody she'd been working on was slow, almost hesitant at first, like the careful footsteps of someone entering a dark room. It rose and fell like waves, pulling soft emotions out of her ribs and onto the keys. It wasn't a song with a name. It was made up of moments, being called aggressive when she asked a question too directly, being followed in the drugstore near her school, hearing the word articulate spoken like a surprise. It was everything she couldn't say. Miss Evelyn looked up after a while, putting her knitting down. That's the one you were working on last week, huh? Alicia nodded. You planning to play that at the show? Maybe. You signed up, didn't you? Alicia paused. Yeah. Good. Don't let them scare you off. You got a gift, baby. Some folks won't know how to hear it until you make 'em. At school the next morning, the tension returned like a fog. Her name was number 17 on the list. People whispered behind their lockers in the lunch line during homeroom. She's gonna choke. Bet she'll cry. Why they even let her sign up? One teacher asked her, in the most patronizing tone possible, if she had a little backup plan in case the nerves got too bad. She didn't respond. She didn't have a backup. She didn't need one. That afternoon, she played again. This time with more force, like the notes had teeth. The song had started to shape itself into 3 parts. A soft beginning, a sudden swell, and then something wild and free in the middle. It wasn't beautiful in the traditional sense. It was raw. It bent notes in strange places. It flirted with silence, then drowned it out. And it ended not with a bang, but with a single chord that hung in the air like a question left unanswered. Later that night, Miss Evelyn brought her some tea. You trying to prove something to them? She asked. Alicia shook her head. To myself. Her grandmother smiled, not softly, but with steel. Then you better play it like it's the last thing they'll ever hear. Friday came quicker than expected, and with it, the kind of nervous energy that buzzed through the hallways like a current no one could quite name. The school gym, normally reserved for dodgeball and awkward pep rallies, had been converted into a makeshift auditorium with rows of folding chairs lined up crookedly, a shaky stage at the front, and a single spotlight mounted on a rusted metal rig. The air smelled like fresh floor polish and the sweat of too many teenagers packed into one room. The first bell hadn't even rung when the rumors started again. Quietly at first, then louder as students arrived and saw the list taped on the double doors. She's number 17, someone whispered near the vending machine. Right after the kid who's doing the ventriloquist act. Talk about tough acts to follow. Or perfect timing, another kid laughed. Get all the weird ones out of the way. Phones were already out. Screens were open to recording apps. Students weren't just attending the talent show. They were documenting it like they expected a disaster. Teachers stood off to the side, sipping coffee, smiling like they were here for encouragement, but their eyes were watching too closely, some already bracing themselves for second-hand embarrassment. Alicia sat behind the stage curtain, knees close together, piano sheet balanced on her lap. Not that she needed it. The notes weren't on the page anymore. They lived in her fingers, in her chest, in the quiet corners of her mind where she went when the world became too loud. She wore black jeans and a clean gray hoodie. No makeup, no dramatic flair. Just her, just as she was. Darnell, the trumpet player, found her backstage. "They're gonna eat their words," he said, half whispering. She didn't respond, but her hands tightened on the piano bench. "Don't let them see you blink," he added, before heading back to his seat. From where she sat, she could hear the beginning of the program. An MC announced the first act, a group of 8th graders doing a clumsy TikTok dance. The crowd laughed, applauded half-heartedly. Next came a boy singing off-key with a ukulele, then a girl doing magic tricks that didn't quite work. Each performance passed in a blur of polite clapping and muffled whispers. The audience wasn't cruel, just impatient. They weren't looking to be inspired, they were waiting to be entertained or to witness someone crash and burn. Alicia closed her eyes. She breathed in deeply, the way Miss Evelyn taught her, through her nose, out through her mouth, letting the nerves pass like traffic. "Remember," her grandmother had said just that morning as they shared oatmeal in silence. "Don't play for their claps. Play so they feel something they can't name." The 12th act finished, then the 13th. Each one pulled her number closer. 14. 15. She stood when 16 was announced. A girl named Chelsea doing stand-up comedy that barely earned chuckles. That was her cue. Her fingers trembled. Her legs felt like they weren't fully hers. She picked up the sheet music, then changed her mind and left it. She didn't need it. Her sneakers made soft squeaks on the gym floor as she crossed behind the curtain. The MC squinted at the list and spoke into the mic, unsure. Next up, we have Alicia Harris, original piano piece." Silence. Not enthusiastic applause, not groans, just silence. She stepped onto the stage and moved toward the piano. An old upright borrowed from the music room, its legs scratched, its keys slightly yellowed. She didn't look at the audience, didn't search for familiar faces, didn't seek approval. She pulled the bench out, sat down, and placed both hands gently on the keys. The spotlight above her buzzed softly. A few kids near the front pulled out their phones. Someone coughed, and then she played. The first note was so soft it barely registered. A pause followed, just long enough to make some think she might have frozen. But then the second note came, then the third, then a line of melody so delicate and aching it felt like glass being laid carefully on velvet. It was not a song they'd heard before, not a cover, not something viral. It didn't follow a pop structure or a familiar rhythm. It was raw, untamed, deliberate. It rose like steam, hovered, then descended like rain. The room changed. At some point, the phones lowered. The fidgeting stopped. Even the teachers looked up from their phones and clipboards. The melody began to shift. A sudden clash of chords snapped the air, like a door slamming in slow motion. Then came the fast passages, her fingers flying across the keys, chasing some invisible memory only she could see. Pain was in it, but not bitterness. Longing, but also strength. Anger, sharp, restrained, righteous. And something else too. Something like joy, but quieter. The kind of joy earned, not gifted. She played without blinking, her eyes half closed, her body leaning into the notes like she was pouring herself into the instrument. Near the end, she hit a high note that lingered in the gym like a held breath. No one moved, no one spoke. It didn't fade. It rang, loud and sure and stubborn. When she struck the final chord, it wasn't with drama. It was gentle, a whisper. She lifted her hands and placed them in her lap. She didn't smile. She didn't bow. She just sat there, breathing, while the sound hung like mist. For a moment, nothing. Then a single clap, then another. Then the room erupted, not with wild screams or whooping cheers, but with something slower, deeper. Applause from the chest, not just the hands. Ms. Fallon looked stunned. Coach Nelson scratched his head and blinked like he wasn't sure he'd seen what he just saw. A few kids looked down at their phones, ashamed. They'd recorded her expecting a train wreck and got a symphony instead. Malik, from the 8th grade jazz club, stood up, then a few more. By the time she walked off the stage, nearly half the room was standing. Backstage, Darnell waited with his trumpet case in his lap. "Told you," he said, voice quiet. She still didn't smile, but her eyes, sharp and warm and full, met his for the first time without flinching. Ms. Fallon didn't say a word. Coach Nelson nodded awkwardly. Someone from the art department, a kind teacher named Mrs. Brody, slipped her a folded note and whispered, "You made them listen." Alicia read the note later, alone, near the water fountain by the science wing. It said, in handwriting that wobbled slightly, "They'll remember this, even the ones who don't say it." She folded the note and slipped it into her pocket. That night, at home, Miss Evelyn was waiting by the window. She didn't ask how it went. She didn't have to. Alicia walked in, took off her hoodie, and sat beside her grandmother on the old beige couch. They said nothing for a while. The only sound was the creak of wood and the faint hum of the city outside. Then, finally, Miss Evelyn asked, "Did they hear you?" Alicia looked down at her hands. They still shook a little, but not from fear. "Yeah," she said, voice soft but sure. "They heard me." Her grandmother smiled, slow and proud. "Good," she whispered. "I hope they never forget." The applause faded by Monday, but what lingered was different. It wasn't noise, it was attention. The kind that followed her down the hallway, not with smirks or muttered jokes, but with a quiet sort of curiosity. Students turned their heads when she walked past, not to mock her this time, but to look. Some moved out of her way. A few nodded. Someone whispered, "That's her." Like they were talking about someone on TV, someone who had done something worth remembering. Alicia felt it in the way lockers opened more carefully near her, in the way conversations paused as she stepped into a room, in the way her name wasn't mispronounced anymore. She didn't crave the spotlight. They could keep that. What mattered was the shift, that almost imperceptible adjustment in how the world around her saw her. It wasn't fame. It was recognition, and it was overdue. She passed Coach Nelson by the gym that morning. He tried to flash her a friendly smile, phone still in hand, earbuds around his neck like always. "Hey, amazing job Friday," he said, voice unsure like he wasn't sure if he had the right to speak to her now. Alicia gave a small nod, nothing more. No bitterness, no gratitude either. Just acknowledgement. As if to say, "I heard you too." Miss Fallon was harder to avoid. She stood outside the music room between second and third period, holding a stack of sheet music and a coffee that steamed even as it sloshed dangerously close to the rim. She looked at Alicia the way someone might look at a book they'd left unopened for years, only to realize it had something powerful inside all along. "Miss Harris," she called, not sweetheart this time. Alicia paused but didn't step closer. Ms. Fallon cleared her throat. "Can I have a word?" There was a brief silence before she spoke again, slower now. "I owe you an apology. What I said before the talent show, it wasn't right. I shouldn't have assumed." Alicia didn't flinch. She just watched her waiting. Ms. Fallon fidgeted with her coffee cup. "I'm still learning," she said finally softly. Alicia's response was simple, but it landed with more weight than any insult she could have thrown. "You should have seen me before Friday." And then she turned and walked away. That sentence echoed behind her, like a final note. Clean, quiet, undeniable. She wasn't angry. She was just finished being unseen. In the cafeteria, the buzz hadn't died down. People were still talking about her performance. Some had rewatched it on their phones. A few kids tried to strike up conversation, asking if she had lessons, if she was going to audition for something. Alicia kept her answers short. Not because she didn't care, but because this wasn't about becoming popular. It was about being real, being heard. She spotted Darnell near the vending machines, 2 chocolate milks in his hands. He slid one across the table without saying anything, then sat down across from her. "I've been thinking," he said, fiddling with the straw. "We should do something together. Like a duet, piano and trumpet." She raised an eyebrow. "You think you can keep up?" He grinned. "You'd be surprised." She didn't smile right away, but then, slowly, just enough to count, she let out a small laugh. The first real laugh anyone at that school had ever heard from her. A few heads turned, not out of mockery, but surprise, as if they were witnessing something rare and valuable. That evening, home felt different too. Miss Evelyn made her famous cornbread and greens, humming softly while she stirred the pot. Alicia sat at the kitchen table, hands folded, eyes distant. "You thinking about what's next?" her grandmother asked. "Maybe," she said. "It's not just about one song, is it?" Miss Evelyn leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "No, it never is." Alicia looked over at the old piano in the corner. For the first time in a long while, she didn't rush to sit at it. She wasn't avoiding it, just letting the music inside her breathe a little before asking it to speak again. That night, as the city murmured outside and the old apartment creaked with familiar sounds, Alicia opened her journal and wrote a single sentence. They listened. Now what will I say next? The following week came with the kind of weather that couldn't make up its mind. The sky stayed gray. Rain threatened but never fell. There was a heaviness in the air, but not unpleasant, like something waiting. That Thursday, as Alicia entered the music room for the first time since the show, she noticed something new on the wall. A photo from the talent show. It wasn't printed fancy, just laser paper and a paperclip. But there she was, seated at the piano, bathed in soft light. The caption read, "Original composition, Alicia Harris." Ms. Fallon nodded at her from the other side of the room. No words, just a nod. Maybe that was enough. During lunch, Darnell showed her a beat he'd been working on, tapping it out on the table with practiced fingers. "I could play under that," Alicia said without hesitation. "Give it depth." "That's what I was hoping you'd say." They sat together, sketching ideas in the margins of old homework. Plans began forming, not for fame, not for attention, but for creation. Something of their own. Something true. Word spread quietly that Alicia had turned down an invitation to join the school's competitive music program. When someone asked her why, she simply replied, "I don't want to play what they tell me, I want to play what I know." And what she knew was this: the world wouldn't always clap. It wouldn't always stand or listen or apologize. But she also knew now that none of that defined her. What defined her was what lived in her hands, what surged through her chest every time she sat in front of those keys. That was hers, and it was enough. One afternoon, a younger girl approached her in the hallway. She looked nervous, eyes wide, behind thick glasses. "I just wanted to say, you were amazing," she said, voice shaking. "I'm learning violin. I thought maybe—" She trailed off. Alicia smiled gently. "Maybe we can play sometime," she offered. The girl lit up like a match. "Really?" "Yeah, really." As she walked away, Alicia felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest. Something between pride and purpose. Like maybe, just maybe, Her voice had cracked something open. Not a wall. Not a revolution. Just enough space for someone else to step through behind her. That night, before bed, she opened the piano again. No audience, no camera, no nerves, just the soft light of the lamp and the creak of the old bench. She placed her hands on the keys and played something new. Not perfect, not polished, but honest. She played until the room felt full, until the silence itself seemed to hum with understanding. Miss Evelyn watched from her chair, a smile pulling at the corners of her mouth. "You got more to say," she whispered. "And they're gonna keep listening now." Alicia didn't answer. She just kept playing. The bullies mocked the poor boy, unaware that he had sacrificed his childhood to raise his little sister, until Vin Diesel appeared and changed everything. They thought Ethan Carter was just a poor, easy target for their cruelty. They mocked his worn-out clothes, laughed at his silence, treated him like an outcast, believing he was too weak to fight back. But they had no idea they were messing with the wrong person. Ethan was not just a quiet student. He was a brother. A boy who had sacrificed his own childhood to raise his little sister, carrying a burden none of them could ever understand. They mistook his silence for weakness, but they didn't realize that his silence was not fear. It was strength. And now, the bullies were about to learn a lesson they would never forget. The halls of Willow Creek High buzzed with the usual chaos. Lockers slamming, laughter echoing, footsteps shuffling against the tile floors. Groups of students clustered together gossiping about weekend plans, upcoming tests, or whatever drama was currently unfolding in their small town. And then there was Ethan Carter. He moved through the hallways like a ghost, silent, unnoticed by most, ignored by many, and mocked by a few. His clothes, always the same worn-out hoodie and faded jeans, made him stand out in all the wrong ways. His tired eyes, always downcast, carried shadows that no 16-year-old should have. He didn't talk much, didn't make friends, didn't join in on the jokes or the banter. And for Jason Miller, that made him the perfect target. Jason was the kind of guy who owned every room he walked into. His father's money ensured that. Tall, good-looking, dressed in expensive sneakers and designer jackets, he had a cocky smirk that never left his face. People laughed at his jokes, whether they were funny or not, and he had a particular hobby finding the weakest, the loneliest, the ones who wouldn't fight back, and Ethan fit the bill perfectly. "Look at him," Jason sneered, leaning against the lockers as Ethan walked past. "Same outfit again? What's wrong, Carter? Your mommy forgot to do the laundry?" His friends, Tyler, Brent, and Cole, snickered on cue. Ethan didn't stop walking. He never did. Jason wasn't satisfied. "Hey, I'm talking to you." A sharp shove to the shoulder. Ethan stumbled, but caught himself. Jason grinned. "You deaf or just stupid?" Ethan exhaled slowly. He could fight back. He had taken worse hits before. Life had thrown much harsher blows at him than Jason Miller ever could. But he had no time for this. No time for them. Lunchtime. A cafeteria filled with chatter, clinking trays, and the occasional burst of laughter. Ethan sat alone, as always. A peanut butter sandwich, a small carton of milk. He ate quietly, head down, mind elsewhere, until Jason's shadow loomed over him. "Oh man, this is sad," Jason announced loudly, ensuring the whole table heard. Sitting all alone, eating. "What is that? A prison meal?" Brent leaned in, smirking. "Maybe that's all he can afford?" Ethan's grip on his sandwich tightened. Jason wasn't done. "You know, Carter, maybe if you actually did something with your life, people would talk to you." Ethan kept eating. Jason scowled. He hated being ignored. So he did what Jason Miller always did. He reached forward and flipped Ethan's tray, sending his food splattering across the table onto his lap. The cafeteria went silent. Everyone was watching. Ethan exhaled. He looked down at his ruined lunch. Then, slowly, he looked up, his expression unreadable. Jason expected anger, rage, humiliation. Instead, Ethan just stood up, wiped his hands on his jeans, and walked away. No words, no reaction. Jason's smirk faltered. He didn't like that. Not one bit. That wasn't the end of it. It never was. A few days later, Ethan opened his locker to find his money gone. The small stash he had been saving from his part-time job vanished. In its place, a note. "Thanks for the lunch money, loser." Jason and his friends watched from across the hallway, laughing, nudging each other. Ethan clenched his fists. That money wasn't for him. It was for Lily, his 5-year-old sister, for her food, for her school supplies, for their survival. But still, Ethan said nothing. He slammed his locker shut and walked away. And Jason, oblivious to the truth, just laughed. But someone else had been watching. Vin Diesel had been in town for a few weeks, working on a small project. He had seen a lot of things in his life, people who talked big, people who acted tough, people who fought battles they didn't need to fight. And then he saw Ethan Carter, the boy who never fought back, the boy who looked like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Something about it didn't sit right. So one evening, he followed him, and what he found shocked him. Vin Diesel didn't consider himself a nosy person, but there was something about Ethan Carter that unsettled him. Maybe it was the way the boy carried himself. Too quiet, too tired, too resigned. Maybe it was the way those other kids tormented him, pushing, taunting, humiliating, while he took it all without a word. Or maybe it was the way he walked out of that cafeteria, shoulders stiff, face unreadable, but eyes that carried something deeper than just the usual hurt. Whatever it was, Vin needed to know. And so, he followed him. Ethan left school in the same hurried manner every day. No loitering, no chatting, no wasting time at his locker. He moved with purpose, his steps quick, his head down. Vin stayed a safe distance behind, watching as the boy cut through town, slipping into side streets, avoiding the main roads where other students might see him. It was like he was trying to disappear. Eventually, Ethan reached a small, run-down house on the outskirts of town. Paint peeling, the lawn overgrown, a single dim light flickering from the porch. Not the kind of place a 16-year-old should be returning to alone. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. Vin waited, debating whether to leave, but then he saw something through the window that stopped him cold. A little girl. She came running toward Ethan the moment he entered, throwing her tiny arms around his waist. Ethan bent down, hugging her tightly, whispering something Vin couldn't hear. The exhaustion in his face softened into something else. Love, warmth, responsibility. He scooped her up and carried her inside, kicking the door shut behind him. And that was all Vin needed to see. He had his answer. Ethan wasn't just some poor kid being bullied at school. He was something much more than that. He was a brother raising a child. That night, Vin couldn't shake the image from his mind. He had seen plenty of tough guys in his life. People who acted like they had the weight of the world on their shoulders. But none of them had actually been carrying it like Ethan was. He wasn't just surviving high school. He was surviving life. And nobody knew. Nobody saw it. Except now, Vin did. And he wasn't about to ignore it. The next day at school, things went on as usual. Ethan moved through the hallways in his silent, invisible way. Jason and his friends, emboldened by their recent success, were already plotting their next move. Today's target? Ethan's shoes. Those things look like they've been through a war. Brent snickered, eyeing the torn-up sneakers Ethan always wore. Think he's waiting for them to fall apart completely before getting a new pair? Jason smirked. I say we help speed up the process. It didn't take much. A simple, accidental trip as Ethan passed by in the hallway, sending him stumbling forward, books scattering across the floor. Before he could recover, Jason casually stepped down, right on top of Ethan's shoe. A crack sounded. A sole, already hanging by a thread, ripped clean off. Laughter erupted. Ethan stared at his ruined shoe for a long moment, jaw tightening, fingers curling into fists at his side. But then, as always, he said nothing. He just picked up his books, shoved them into his bag, and limped away. But this time, Vin Diesel saw everything. Something inside him snapped. Enough was enough. That afternoon, as Jason and his friends sat in the cafeteria, basking in their latest victory, a shadow loomed over their table. They looked up, then immediately wished they hadn't. Vin Diesel, arms crossed, eyes cold. Jason's smirk faltered. You think you're tough, huh? Vin's voice was calm, but there was something dangerous behind it. Tearing people down, making yourselves feel bigger by making someone else feel smaller. Jason swallowed, shifting uncomfortably. I don't know what you're talking about, man. Vin didn't blink. You know exactly what I'm talking about. And here's the thing, you got no clue what that boy's been through. None of you do. But I do. Brent forced a laugh. What, you his bodyguard now? Vin leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. Number. But maybe he should have one. His gaze swept across them, his expression unreadable. Leave him alone. Jason huffed. Or what? Vin's eyes darkened. Or you're gonna find out what it's like to be on the other side of this game you love playing. Silence. Nobody moved. Then, without another word, Vin straightened and walked away. Jason exhaled, forcing a smirk. Whatever, he muttered. But the laughter was gone. The victory, the satisfaction, it had vanished, replaced by something else. Something uncomfortable, because for the first time, someone had stood up for Ethan, and Jason wasn't sure how to handle that. Meanwhile, Ethan had no idea any of it had happened. He had spent the afternoon at work, scrubbing dishes, ignoring the ache in his feet. His shift ended late, like always, and he made his way home in the dark. But when he reached his front porch, he stopped. Something was sitting there. A box. Confused, he bent down and opened it. Inside, a brand new pair of sneakers. Sturdy, high quality, better than anything he had ever owned. A small note was tucked inside. No one fights alone. Ethan stared at it for a long time. Then, for the first time in a long time, his eyes burned. Not with exhaustion, not with pain, but with something else. Hope. The next day, Jason saw Ethan walk into school with new shoes. And, for the first time, Jason felt small. Jason couldn't stop staring. Ethan Carter, the same kid he and his friends had spent weeks humiliating, walked into school that morning wearing a brand new pair of sneakers. Not the torn, barely held together pair he had been limping around in the day before. These were sturdy, clean, well-made. They didn't belong to a kid like Ethan. They didn't fit the image Jason had built of him in his mind. Jason had seen the way Ethan carried himself, how he never pushed back, how he never even tried to defend himself. He was supposed to be a nobody, a loser, someone with nothing. And yet, here he was, walking through the hallways, looking almost unshaken. For the first time since they started tormenting him, Jason felt something unexpected. Doubt. Brent leaned in. Where do you think he got those? Tyler scoffed. Probably stole them. But Jason wasn't convinced. Something didn't add up. He had stolen from Ethan before. He had seen what little the kid had. There was no way he had the money to buy those. Then he remembered the conversation in the cafeteria yesterday. Vin Diesel. That guy had shown up out of nowhere, defending Ethan like he knew something nobody else did. Jason didn't like it. It made him uneasy. He needed to know more. The day passed as usual, but Jason couldn't shake the feeling that there was something about Ethan that he and his friends had missed. That afternoon, instead of heading home, he did something he had never done before. He followed Ethan. Ethan left school the same way he always did, quickly, head down, moving with a kind of urgency that Jason had never bothered to question before. Jason stayed back, keeping his distance, weaving through the crowds as Ethan disappeared into the quieter parts of town. He expected the kid to go to some rundown part-time job or a crumbling apartment. What he didn't expect was to see Ethan step into a tiny, barely standing house at the edge of town. It was small, barely big enough for 2 people, with paint peeling from the walls and a front porch that looked like it might collapse at any second. Jason frowned. This wasn't just a bad home. It was a desperate one. He moved closer, staying low, peering through a side window. Inside, he saw Ethan drop his bag onto a chair and turn just as a little girl came running into the room. She couldn't have been more than 5. Ethan bent down, scooping her up with ease, holding her close as she giggled against his shoulder. Jason blinked, completely thrown off. A sister. He had never even considered the possibility. He had never seen Ethan talk about family, never heard him mention parents or siblings. But now, watching him pull a small carton of milk from the fridge, half empty with barely any food on the shelves behind it, Jason realized something horrifying. Ethan wasn't just some poor kid struggling to get by. He was raising his sister, alone. Jason took a step back, his heart pounding. His mind raced, trying to process everything he had just seen. The exhaustion on Ethan's face, the way he always left school so fast, the way he never had money, the way he never fought back. It wasn't because he was weak. It was because he couldn't afford to fight back. Every dollar he earned, every ounce of energy he had, was going into keeping that little girl safe. And Jason had spent weeks making his life even harder. Guilt clawed at his chest in a way he had never felt before. He had always thought of himself as just having fun, playing around, putting Ethan in his place. But he had never once stopped to think that Ethan had bigger problems than schoolyard bullying. Jason had stolen from him. He had taken money that was meant for his sister's food. He had broken his shoes when those were probably the only ones he had. A sickening feeling churned in Jason's stomach. He had never felt bad for bullying anyone before. But this was different. He had crossed a line he hadn't even known existed. That night Jason lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The image of Ethan holding his little sister burned into his mind. He thought about the brand new shoes Ethan had worn that day. Someone had given them to him. Vin Diesel. That man had stepped in where Jason should have stopped. And for the first time in his life, Jason felt ashamed of the person he had become. The next day, Jason didn't say anything to his friends. He didn't laugh at their jokes. He didn't join in when they snickered about Ethan's quiet demeanor. Instead, he found himself watching from a distance, observing, thinking. By lunch, he had made a decision. It wasn't much. It wasn't enough. But it was something. Ethan returned to his locker that afternoon and found something waiting for him. A simple black backpack, brand new, sturdy, with zippers that actually worked. Inside, a stack of neatly folded bills, exactly the amount that had been stolen from him, and a small, scrawled note. I owe you one. Ethan stared at it for a long time. His hands tightened around the bag, his throat thick. He didn't need to ask who had left it. He knew. And for the first time, he realized something had changed. Jason Miller had stopped laughing. Ethan stood in front of his locker, staring at the brand-new backpack in his hands. The weight of it felt unfamiliar, the sturdy material foreign against his fingertips. It wasn't just the bag, it was the money inside. The exact amount that had been stolen from him. And the note. "I owe you one." There was no name, but Ethan didn't need one. He knew. Jason. For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt something other than exhaustion, other than frustration, other than the heavy burden of surviving each day. It was something fragile, something he wasn't sure he could trust. A crack in the pattern, a shift in the balance. Jason Miller, the same person who had laughed at his misery, had stolen from him, had made him feel less than human, was now trying to make amends. But why? Ethan wasn't naive. People like Jason didn't change overnight. There had to be a reason. He turned, scanning the cafeteria, and his eyes found Jason sitting at his usual table. But something was different. Jason wasn't laughing. He wasn't smirking. He wasn't even talking to his friends. He just sat there quiet, staring down at his tray, pushing his food around without eating. Brent and Tyler were talking, cracking jokes, but Jason didn't react. He looked lost. Ethan didn't know what to do with that. He had spent so long learning to ignore Jason, to endure, to tune out the cruelty. And now, faced with this act of silent reparation, he found himself unsure. Did Jason think a backpack and some money would erase everything? That a single gesture would make up for weeks of torment? Ethan wasn't sure if he could forgive, but he wasn't sure if he couldn't either. That afternoon, as he left school, he felt a presence behind him. He turned, expecting another ambush, but instead found Jason standing a few feet away, hands shoved in his pockets, his usual confidence nowhere to be found. "I know you know it was me," Jason muttered, not quite meeting Ethan's gaze. He hesitated, exhaling sharply. "I was a dick. I didn't know. I should have, but I didn't. About Lily, about your parents, about everything." Ethan stiffened. The fact that Jason even knew Lily's name sent a surge of defensiveness through him. "Who told you?" Jason shifted uncomfortably. "I followed you. Not in a creepy way, just, I needed to understand." He ran a hand through his hair, looking more frustrated with himself than anything else. "I didn't get it before. I thought you were just, some quiet loser who didn't care. But I was wrong. You're not weak, Carter. You're stronger than any of us." Ethan wasn't sure how to respond to that. He had spent so long believing that strength was measured in how much he could endure, in how well he could protect Lily, in how much he could sacrifice. He had never expected someone like Jason Miller to say those words to him. Jason took a step back, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve that. But I wanted you to know that I'm done. With all of it." He hesitated, then added, "And if anyone else gives you shit, I'll make sure they don't." Ethan studied him for a long moment, searching for insincerity, for any trace of mockery. But there was none. Just a boy who had spent too long being someone he wasn't proud of, trying awkwardly, hesitantly, to be better. Ethan didn't say thank you. He didn't nod. He didn't smile. But he also didn't walk away. And for Jason, that was enough. Things didn't change overnight. But they did change. Jason stopped laughing at Ethan. Brent and Tyler followed his lead, confused at first, but unwilling to push back against their leader's sudden shift. The cafeteria incident stopped. The shoving in the hallways ended. And though Ethan still kept to himself, still avoided unnecessary conversations, he found that the weight on his shoulders felt just a little bit lighter. Vin Diesel, watching from a distance, noticed. One afternoon, after Ethan's shift at the diner, Vin was waiting outside. He leaned against his car, arms crossed, that knowing smirk on his face. "So," he said as Ethan approached, "I see the kid finally grew a conscience." Ethan exhaled, shaking his head. "I don't know what happened." Vin nodded thoughtfully. "Guilt's a funny thing. Hits you in places you didn't expect. Some people ignore it. Some people let it eat them alive. And some people—" He tilted his head, watching Ethan closely. "Try to fix what they broke." Ethan frowned. "Do you think he can?" Vin considered the question for a long moment before replying. "I think he's trying. And sometimes, that's the hardest part." Ethan didn't respond right away. He thought about Jason's expression that day outside school, the uncertainty in his voice, the way he had seemed smaller somehow. "I don't know if I can ever forgive him," Ethan admitted. Vin smiled, a little sad, a little knowing. "That's not something you owe him. Forgiveness isn't about making him feel better. It's about making sure you don't carry the weight of what he did any longer than you have to." Ethan wasn't sure if he was ready for that, but maybe someday he would be. Winter came, and with it, a new reality. Ethan still worked late nights, still picked Lily up from daycare, still did everything he had always done to keep them afloat. But things were different now. One day he found a small envelope tucked into his locker. No name. No handwriting he recognized. Inside was a neatly folded sheet of paper. "The school's got a fund for students in need. Some of us pitched in. Just thought you should know. No one should have to do this alone." Ethan stared at it, his throat tightening. He didn't need to ask who had left it. A few weeks later, a scholarship application arrived in his mailbox. He didn't need to ask about that, either. And when Lily came home one evening to find a brand new backpack waiting for her, filled with school supplies she had never dared to ask for, Ethan just sat on the couch, pressing his fingers to his temples, exhaling shakily. No one owed him anything, no one had to help. But they had. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't fighting completely alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. A quiet black girl walks into Brooklyn High. She's here to finish her senior year and stay unnoticed. But before she can even make it through the first week, a white girl in her class decides she's the perfect target. The laughter starts first, then the whispers, then the public humiliation. And when the bully smirks, convinced it's time for one final performance, the crowd gathers, waiting for the inevitable. But there's something they don't know about the black girl. She's not just the new kid, she's a fighter trained to battle, and she's about to remind them all exactly what that means. The Tennessee morning rolled in slow and gray over the quiet town of Franklin, where the hills turned gold in autumn, and the air felt like the hush before a sermon. At 7:23 a.m., the bus wheezed to a stop in front of Mason Ridge High School, and students poured out in waves, laughing, stretching, thumping their backpacks against each other's shoulders. They moved in tight clusters, already shaped by years of knowing who belonged where. But the last person to step off the bus walked alone. Alana Pierce adjusted the strap of her denim backpack and stared up at the school's wide brick face, the painted eagle mascot spreading its wings above the double doors. Mason Ridge was clean, polished, and proud of it. Football trophies lined the glass cases, banners from state championships hung in the halls, and signs promoting school values, respect, integrity, kindness, were posted in every corner. But Alana knew better. The words were decoration. What ruled this place was something unspoken and far more dangerous: culture. And in places like this, kids like her were rarely welcomed into that culture without a test. She walked inside, her shoes quiet against the waxed floor. Though no one said anything, she could feel it. The weight of dozens of eyes catching sight of her for just a second too long. They looked, turned, whispered. Maybe they didn't say, "Black girl," out loud. But she felt the way their eyes narrowed, their heads tilted. She'd seen that look before, and that measuring look. Was she going to be loud? Was she going to get angry? Was she going to play the victim? Was she dangerous? That's how it always went. The script never changed. Alana wasn't surprised. Mason Ridge was 92% white, something she'd Googled when her father told her they were moving here for a fresh start. Franklin was safe, slow, full of churches and weekend farmers markets. But beneath the smiles and southern hospitality, Alana had learned quickly how isolation worked. You didn't need to scream slurs to make someone feel small. All you had to do was look right through them. In homeroom, no one sat next to her. In English, a boy raised his hand and asked if they were gonna start teaching Ebonics now, after Alana answered a question with perfect diction. The teacher smiled awkwardly and moved on. At lunch, she found the corner table near the vending machines and sat alone. She didn't pull out her phone, didn't pretend to be busy. She just ate, slow and steady, while the hum of cafeteria noise swirled around her. That was when she heard the voice. "Well, well, look what we have here." Alana didn't even have to look up. The tone was casual, amused, but meant to draw attention. She'd heard it too many times before. She glanced upward, meeting the blue eyes of Savannah Whitmore, Queen of Mason Ridge. Blonde hair, flawless makeup, perfectly curated cruelty. Two girls flanked her like well-trained accessories, Brielle and Kenzie. Behind them stood two boys, both tall, both smirking. "She's real quiet," Kenzie said, biting into her apple. "Probably doesn't speak English." "Maybe she's one of those girls from Chicago," Brielle added, eyes wide in mock concern. "Like, you know, gangs." Someone laughed. A few more turned their heads to see what was happening. Phones were already out. Alana felt the burn of them, not on her skin, but in the air around her. Recording. Judging. "Hey," Savannah said, leaning on the edge of Alana's table. "Do you know how to say hello? Or are you just too good for us?" Alana didn't answer. She picked up her juice box and took a calm sip. The silence made Savannah's lips twitch. She reached forward and knocked the juice over with a perfectly manicured finger. It spilled across Alana's tray, soaking her sandwich and chips. The room went quiet for a beat. The laughter didn't come immediately this time. There was a pause, as if they were waiting to see what the black girl would do. Whether she'd get up and shout, whether she'd swing, but Alana didn't do any of that. She exhaled softly, set her fork down, picked up the dripping tray, and walked, without a word, toward the trash can. That silence followed her like a second shadow. By the time sixth period rolled around, the school was buzzing. Not about Savannah, but about Alana. About how she didn't flinch, didn't cry, didn't even blink. Just stared at Savannah with the calm of someone who had survived much worse. Some kids said it was brave. Others whispered that she was probably just waiting for the right moment to snap. One boy in chemistry said, "She's from the city, man." Those girls don't mess around. Savannah hated the shift. She could feel it in the way people watched Alana walk down the hall. It wasn't mockery anymore. It was curiosity, respect, and that was dangerous. That night at home, Alana sat in the kitchen of their small rental off Lewisburg Pike. The house smelled faintly of coffee and the old wood her dad had sanded down himself. Across the counter, Marcus Pierce, former middleweight MMA champion turned mechanic, watched his daughter pick at her dinner. "Talk to me," he said, his voice calm but grounded like bedrock. "Some girl at school," she muttered. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "She hit you?" "No." He didn't say anything, just waited. Alana finally looked up. "They tested me today, just like always. Saw a black girl. Thought I'd bark or bite. Wanted a show." "You give them one?" She shook her head. I walked away. Marcus nodded. "That's harder than it looks." "Didn't feel like it," she whispered. "It felt like losing." He set his coffee cup down and walked around to sit across from her. "Losing is when you let them turn you into what they already believe you are. I just hate that they expect it, that they want me to be the angry black girl, so they can feel justified, so they can laugh and say, 'See? Told you.'" He nodded again. His face didn't move much, but his eyes softened. "That's the trick of racism now. It don't wear hoods anymore. It wears perfume. It smiles. It pretends like it's joking." Alana stared at him. "I didn't raise you to fight every battle," he said, leaning in. "But I didn't raise you to run from all of them either. You pick your moment, and when you do, you don't fight for your pride. You fight so they never try it again, with you or with anyone else." She swallowed hard, blinked away the burn behind her eyes. "I don't want to be her again," she said. "You're not her," he said. "You're you, and that's plenty." The next morning, the whispers were louder. Eyes lingered longer. In gym class, Brielle accidentally bumped her shoulder so hard Alana stumbled. Kenzie shoved her during dodgeball. The coach looked but said nothing. Savannah smiled from the bleachers. Liam, the quarterback, made a joke about Alana being from war zones. Another boy offered her a banana, laughing, "I heard you people like these." Still, Alana said nothing, but her fingers curled slightly. That afternoon, as the last bell rang and students surged out of classrooms like a tide, a message spread down the halls. "Behind the gym. After school. She's getting handled." Alana heard it too. She didn't speak. She just walked toward the back of the school, and the fighter in her finally opened her eyes. The pavement behind Mason Ridge High was still damp from a light morning drizzle. Cracked in places, faded white lines marking what used to be a faculty parking lot. It was the kind of forgotten corner perfect for the things that weren't meant to be seen, like the so-called talks students gave to one another when authority wasn't around. Word had spread fast. By the time Alana rounded the corner, her footsteps even and quiet, a group of nearly 30 students had already gathered in a half-moon, phones tucked in palms, faces lit with expectation. They weren't here to see a fight. They were here to see her fall. At the center stood Savannah, arms crossed, mouth pulled into a smirk that didn't quite reach her eyes. Kenzie and Brielle flanked her, shifting nervously but playing their parts. Behind them, Liam and Noah, the muscle, stood close, all swagger and snide chuckles, cracking their knuckles like a performance. But it was the silence of the crowd that struck Alana. They weren't cheering. They weren't shouting. They were waiting. Like they didn't know how this would go. Like they were finally unsure who held the power. Savannah was the first to speak. "Well, look who showed up. I thought you'd be halfway home by now. Isn't that what you people do, run when it gets real?" Alana didn't answer. She stepped forward, her expression unreadable, posture relaxed, hands still at her sides. "You think throwing juice on someone is what makes you strong?" Her voice was soft, steady, but it cut through the tension like a blade. "You think this—" She gestured to the circle. "Is power?" Savannah's jaw clenched. "You have no idea what power looks like." Liam laughed, stepping forward, eager. "You done with the speeches, or are you going to do something, Chicago?" He said the city like it was an insult, like it meant she was dirty, broken, violent. And that was when something shifted in Alana's eyes. Not rage, not even anger, just clarity. She had hoped to avoid this. She had done everything right, but sometimes silence only feeds the wolves. Liam swung first. It was wide, theatrical, meant to impress the crowd more than to land a punch. But by the time his fist crossed the air, Alana was already inside his reach. She moved like she'd been born for it. One hand caught his wrist, the other pressed into his elbow, and with a slight twist, his body flipped. The sound of his back hitting the pavement echoed. He groaned, breathless, eyes wide in disbelief. Phones rose, higher now. Mouths opened, but no one spoke. Liam rolled to his side, moaning, stunned. Noah stepped up next, cursing under his breath, charging without thinking. Alana ducked his first jab, sidestepped the second, and pivoted behind him. She wrapped her arm under his shoulder, locked it, and swept his legs in one swift motion. He collapsed like a felled tree. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Kenzie took a step back. Brielle looked like she wanted to disappear. Savannah's smile faltered. Her eyes darted around. No teachers, no backup. Only witnesses. Alana didn't gloat. She didn't raise her arms. She just stood, calm and still, her breathing even, hands once again at her sides. Her voice was low when she finally looked at Savannah. "You brought all these people to watch me fall, but now they're seeing you." Savannah's face twisted, a snarl building behind her teeth, and she lunged. No strategy, just desperation. Her hand reached for Alana's hair, but Alana's reflexes were already in motion. She grabbed Savannah's wrist mid-air, firm but controlled, and held it there, suspended. For a moment they just stood like that, locked in place, eyes locked. Savannah's breath quickened. Alana leaned in slightly, just enough that only Savannah could hear. "You don't have any power over me, and you never will." Then she let go. Savannah stumbled backward, caught off balance more by the weight of those words than by Alana's grip. For the first time, the Queen of Mason Ridge looked small. The circle around them had grown completely silent. Even the phones had dropped. Because what they'd just seen wasn't a fight, it was a revelation. And no one knew how to process it. It was at that exact moment that the door to the gym slammed open. A sharp voice cut through the air. "What the hell's going on here?" It was Coach Langley, 6'2", former Marine. No patience for drama. He looked at Liam, still groaning. Then at Alana, standing alone, surrounded by students. "Everyone, inside! Now!" They scattered, most of them pretending they'd never been there. Phones disappeared. Eyes turned to the ground. But Coach Langley didn't miss a beat. "Pierce, in my office. Now. And someone get the nurse for these two." Alana nodded. She didn't argue. 15 minutes later, she sat across from Principal Moran, Coach Langley, and a school counselor who kept asking if she felt emotionally distressed. She wasn't crying. She wasn't yelling. She just sat there, straight-backed, waiting. "Violence," Principal Moran said, hands folded, "is never acceptable no matter the situation." Alana said nothing. "You understand we'll need to contact your parent or guardian." She nodded. "Fine," she said. "Call him." The principal leaned back, sighing. "This isn't how we like to welcome new students, but your actions today." "I defended myself," she interrupted. It was the first time she'd raised her voice, and even then, it was barely above a whisper. "They cornered me. They planned it. They recorded it. I didn't start this." Moran blinked, shifting in his chair. "That may be, but you escalated it. We'll let your father speak before we decide the next step." 20 minutes passed. Then came the sound of boots on linoleum. When the office door opened, the room shifted, because the man who stepped inside wasn't just any parent. He was a legend. Marcus Pierce. Tall, solid, eyes like steel, A name once printed on ESPN, a face known in the MMA world. The Rook, they used to call him, a fighter who'd walked away at the height of his career. For a moment, even Coach Langley looked stunned. "Mr. Pierce," the principal started, standing. Marcus nodded, but didn't shake his hand. He looked at his daughter. "You good?" She nodded. "Did you do what I taught you?" Another nod. "Then I'm proud of you." The silence that followed was thick. Finally, the principal cleared his throat. "Mr. Pierce, we didn't realize—" "Does it matter who I am?" Marcus asked, cutting him off. "Would it change how you saw my daughter if I wasn't famous?" Moran stammered. Marcus turned to Coach Langley. "You saw the footage yet?" "Footage?" Langley asked. "She wasn't the only one recording," Marcus said. "A student already sent it to me." He pulled out his phone, pressed play, and let them all watch. The silence after was undeniable. When the video ended, Marcus put his phone away. "My daughter didn't fight to hurt anyone. She fought to stop them from hurting her. And she did it with control and restraint most grown men don't have." Moran tried to compose himself. "Mr. Pierce, we still have to follow district policy." Marcus looked at him long and hard. "Your policy allowed my daughter to be harassed for a week straight, while teachers turned away. So let's not pretend this is about rules. It's about image." Moran opened his mouth, then closed it again. That night, the video went viral inside the school. Not just because of the takedowns, but because of the way Alana didn't celebrate, didn't gloat. Just stood her ground strong and still. The next day, everything changed. Alana walked through the halls and people stepped aside, not out of fear, but out of something else. Respect. A few nodded. Some smiled. No jokes. No whispers. Savannah wasn't in school. Liam had a bruised ego and a sprained wrist. Brielle and Kenzie stayed quiet for the first time since freshman year. Alana didn't gloat. She just walked to class. A girl from her homeroom, a soft-spoken redhead named Molly, asked if she wanted to sit together at lunch. Alana said yes. By the time fifth period rolled around, one of the boys from the basketball team asked if she played. She didn't answer, just smiled. And for the first time since arriving at Mason Ridge, Alana Pierce felt seen. Not feared, not mocked, just seen. And the whole school learned a lesson that day, one they wouldn't forget. The strongest person in the room isn't the loudest. It's the one who knows when to speak and when to stand. By Friday morning, the energy at Mason Ridge High had shifted entirely. Not in some loud, dramatic way, but in the kind of subtle transformation that older folks notice first. The way eyes stopped narrowing when Alana walked by. The way conversations paused, not to mock her, but out of respect. And the way the hallways finally stopped holding their breath when she entered. It was the kind of shift that didn't happen because a teacher gave a speech or a counselor put up an anti-bullying poster. It happened because something real broke through the routine. The truth was, most of the students had never seen someone like Alana. Someone who looked like her, carried herself with such quiet strength, and refused to fit the story they'd already written for her. They expected defiance or fear. They got dignity instead. She didn't walk the halls like a conqueror. She wasn't trying to become the new queen bee. She wore the same jacket, carried the same backpack, kept her headphones in even when there was no music. But now people nodded at her. Some whispered her name not with disdain, but curiosity. And some just looked at her like they were seeing her for the first time. What struck them most wasn't the fight itself. It was the fact that after everything, Alana never once bragged. She didn't post about it. She didn't share the video. She didn't even talk about it. She just showed up, sat through class, took notes, laughed once in history when the teacher told a dry joke, and that laugh was more powerful than any punch. Savannah didn't return that week. Word around school was that her parents were in meetings with the superintendent, trying to decide whether to transfer her to a private school. The district didn't make a public statement, but there were whispers of suspension and a formal investigation. Not because of what she did to Alana, but because she got caught. The truth is, Mason Ridge didn't care about bullying until it made them look bad. Until the videos started circulating beyond the school walls, until parents began asking questions, until alumni started posting online that they were disappointed in the values being upheld. One clip even made it onto the local news, blurred faces, but the story was there. Student targeted in racially charged harassment incident defends herself. Community divided. Divided indeed. At home, Alana sat at the kitchen table while her father flipped pancakes, humming softly to the rhythm of the morning news. Marcus didn't say much, but she knew he was watching closely, watching the way she carried herself, watching to see if she was proud, ashamed, or somewhere in between. "You sleep better?" he finally asked. She nodded. "A little." He set a plate down in front of her, heavy with pancakes and strawberries. "Good. You did right." She looked at him. "Even if they say I started it?" He smiled just slightly. "You didn't start anything, you just decided it was done." She stabbed a piece of pancake. "It's not over. Not really." He sat down across from her, elbows on the table. "No, it's not. But that's the thing about standing up for yourself. It doesn't erase what happened. It just makes people think twice before doing it again." She nodded slowly. "I think I scared them." Maybe they needed to be scared. But more than that, you reminded them that strength doesn't have to be loud. When Monday came, Principal Moran made an announcement over the intercom. It was the usual script. The school did not tolerate harassment. Respect was a core value, and every student deserved safety. It was sterile, emotionless, and probably written by the district's legal team. But then he added something off-script, something small. "I want to thank those students who've reminded us this week what it means to lead with grace, under pressure." That was all. But everyone knew who he was talking about. That afternoon in the cafeteria, Alana walked past the corner table where she used to sit alone. It was empty now. Not because she wasn't welcome there, but because she'd been invited elsewhere. Molly had saved her a seat at the center table, next to a kid from the AV club and a girl who played clarinet in the school band. It wasn't the popular table, but it was real. And it was enough. As she sat down, someone tapped her shoulder. She turned to see Mr. Caldwell, the U.S. history teacher, holding a small stack of flyers. "I'm starting a student panel," he said, voice low but kind. "Open conversations about race, equity, and identity. No lectures. Just students talking to students." "I was wondering..." Alana looked at him surprised. "You want me to be on it?" "Only if you want to be," he replied. "No pressure. But people listen when you speak, even when you don't say much." She took the flyer and nodded. "I'll think about it. That's all I ask." Later that day, walking down the hallway past the display of sports trophies and senior portraits, Alana heard footsteps behind her. She turned slightly and saw Kenzie, alone, looking nervous. "Hey," Kenzie said, shifting her weight awkwardly. I wanted to say I was wrong. About you. About everything." Alana didn't say anything. She waited. "I was just trying to fit in," Kenzie continued. "That's not an excuse. I was mean. You didn't deserve any of it." The hallway was quiet. Finally, Alana nodded. "Thanks." Kenzie looked surprised. "That's it?" "What do you want me to say?" Alana asked gently. "You owned it. That matters more than a big speech." Kenzie looked like she might cry, but she smiled instead. "You're kind. After everything. You're still kind." Alana shrugged. My kindness doesn't mean I'm weak. I know, Kenzie said. Trust me, I know. Weeks passed. The leaves turned from yellow to orange to brittle brown. Thanksgiving came and went, and Mason Ridge kept changing, not just because of policies or assemblies or diversity posters, but because of a girl who refused to let them define her. They talked differently now in the hallways. They thought twice before making a joke at someone's expense. They invited people they used to ignore. Not perfectly, not always. But the shift had begun. Because when you see someone stand up not just for themselves but for something bigger, it plants a seed. And some of those seeds take root. By December, Alana had joined the panel Mr. Caldwell started. She didn't say much at the first meeting, but when she did speak, people leaned in. She talked about code switching, about feeling invisible and hypervisible at the same time, about how silence was a kind of armor but not a home. Her voice shook once, but she kept going. After the meeting, a younger student, a freshman girl with deep brown skin and shy eyes, came up to her and whispered, "Thank you. I didn't know people like us could be strong like that, and still be good." Alana smiled, really smiled. You can be both. Don't let them make you choose. That night, she sat at her desk, flipping through a small leather notebook her father had given her years ago. Most of the pages were blank, but now she picked up a pen and began to write. They wanted me to be angry. I chose to be whole. They wanted a fight. I gave them the truth. They saw a stereotype. I showed them a story. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, but inside, Alana felt steady. She hadn't set out to be a symbol. She hadn't planned on being anything more than a girl trying to finish senior year. But life doesn't always wait for you to be ready. Sometimes it throws you into the spotlight, not to shine, but to survive. And if you're strong enough, if you're grounded enough, you do both. At Mason Ridge High, they would remember her name not because she threw a punch, but because she carried something heavier. The weight of being judged before being known, and still walking forward with grace. And though they hadn't seen the fighter in her at first, by the time they did, it wasn't fear they felt. It was something far deeper. Respect.